hope you're all well. My name is Roland. I do events and publicity for Educate Ventures Research. Today we are going to be continuing the conversation around the necessity of education reform with a webinar on hearing from the perspectives of young people and those that work with them inside and out of what is probably seen as the standard UK education route. So we've gathered a number of speakers today whose time with us this morning I'm very grateful to have. I hope you find the voices diverse. A number of the speakers today Educate hasn't actually engaged with before, so as our director Rose Luckin had mentioned previously in previous episodes of this series, we may hopefully hear some opinions we haven't actually heard before, and moreover it may become apparent that we may not actually be addressing the things that we should be, and our focus for education reform might be disagreed with in the course of the morning. The series, the education reform series that we've been running, was born out of our interest in education and education reform. And at the start of the year, the director, Rose, had contributed to a joint statement issued to the government on a strategy to give everyone in teaching and learning a ladder of opportunity to a better future. You can read more about that on our website, which I will link to in the chat whilst everybody is talking this morning. To also lastly briefly set expectations around the session, contrary to our sort of beliefs about organising this webinar, it's actually been a little bit trickier to gather voices from younger people than we thought it had be. This might be because of the specifics of the topics, but I think we thought we'd have a whole room full of young people talking about reform, and trying to find that that approach was a little bit more challenging than we thought it would be. So we've tried to compromise and ask some professionals who work with young people and who have advocated for changes in the past to speak to the points as well. Hopefully there should be a good cross-section of perspectives for us to listen to. Anyway, enough of me rambling, and I will hand over to Lord Jim Knight to introduce himself and each of the speakers today. Thank you. Jim, please take it away when you are ready.
Thanks very much, Roland, and welcome to everybody.
If you haven't muted yourself.
No, I've not muted myself. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, good, fine. I thought you could, but, you know, you never know. You've got to come up with the catchphrases of the era.
Absolutely.
Can you hear me? And the only other bit of housekeeping would be, if you're not one of our panel, it would really help me if you turned your camera off, because otherwise you're busying up my gallery with people that I think I need to bring in when I don't. Thank you. That's really helpful. So let's start by asking everyone to introduce themselves. And I would request sort of more like tweet length introductions rather than full biographies, just so that we're hanging on to time. So let's start with Deborah, and then we'll move around my screen.
Hi, my name is Deborah. I'm 19 years old and I'm an FBB graduate and also currently work full-time for the organisation as a project assistant and also on their comms team.
And for those that don't know FBB, Football Beyond Borders, explain what Football Beyond Borders does.
So Football Beyond Borders is an educational charity that works alongside schools and inside schools, helping young people that are disengaged in school, and we use the power of football to help engage them with their learnings and also help them get through to the end of year 11 with both GCSEs or level 4 or 5 in GCSEs, both English and maths. And we use the power of football to help them help them gain self-awareness, good relationships between their parents and also their peers and their teachers. But we work alongside schools and do like long-term intervention. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Joe, before you take a picture of it, you could do that later. We need you to be taken off mute, which is now done.
Hello, hi everyone. I'm Joe from Football Beyond Borders. My position, I'm head of policy. So my job is to take the stuff that Deborah and Tom see day to day and what we hear from our young people and try to sort of articulate it and make it relevant for the national conversation. And yeah, just really excited to be here and hear all the different organisations and the different young people speak today.
Great. Kate?
Hey, my name's Kate Broadrive. I'm a teacher down at Wilden School for the Wilden Trust in Southampton, and we're one of the EdTech demonstrator schools. So I've been busy working with one of my digital leaders you're going to hear from in a moment when he joins us with one of our Year 10 students today. So thanks for having us on.
Great, thank you. And then Caroline and Ben.
Hi.
Hi.
I am a homeschooling mum. I'm a scientist and academic, so I've been through academia, been in it a lot, and since COVID we've been homeschooling and decided to stick at it. And Ben is my eldest child who's homeschooling. Say a bit about yourself.
So my favourite topic has always been about aircraft.
Okay.
I really want to be a jet pilot and fly an F-18.
But I could ask what an F-18 is because I'm ignorant about aircraft.
It's a short range. I'm not sure if it's a ground attack aircraft, but
Okay.
it's in the US Army Corps.
Very good. And what year or what age are you, Ben?
I'm in year 3 at school, in school years, but my actual age is 8.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. You're really welcome. Tom.
Yeah, hi everyone. I also probably wanted to be a pilot at that age, but didn't make it. So now working at Football Beyond Borders. And yeah, hopefully today, I work on the program side, so oversee the programs we deliver, and not too much to add on to Deborah's brilliant intro other than, yeah, I think at FBB we have a real commitment to embedding youth voice. So hopefully you won't hear too much from myself and Joe today, more from Deborah being a past participant who, yeah, as you can probably see behind me and Joe, is quite a bit younger than us and is much more in contact with kind of our young people on a day-to-day basis and their needs and challenges. Yeah, so, and if you do hear from me and Joe, sort of everything will be informed or from insights from young people. So that's really what we've come to do today, is try and represent the voices of our young people. And thank you very, very much for having us.
Well, thank you. Ellie.
Hello, I'm Ellie. I'm here as a director for a KIC called Square Peg. We work in the area of really campaigning and to raise awareness and affect change for children who experience barriers to school attendance. That can be a whole plethora of barriers that impact these children, from deprivation, poverty, bullying, mental health issues, unmet SEN, excluded. I'm also a parent with lived experience. I've got 2 children with complex needs, starting with health, but really as they went through the system spanning all areas. They both struggled with school attendance. And so I lived for the last 6 years with trying to get 2 children through the system unsuccessfully at the moment.
It's an ongoing project for you.
Yeah, indeed.
Eddie.
Hi, I'm Eddie. I'm 16, so I'm in year 11. I would be doing my GCSEs if they weren't cancelled, which I think I found really interesting experience, preparing for years towards my GCSEs, which are cancelled and then having to adapt. I'm a member of the UNICEF UK Youth Advisory Board, where I kind of advocate for child rights and change to help children, and I'm really passionate about education and its power for change and young youth voice.
Very good, thank you. We might come back to your use of the word interesting to describe the cancellation of exams. Interesting is always an interesting word because it can mean so many different things. Fiona.
Hello, I'm Fiona Miller and I'm a journalist who writes about education. I'm also a school governor and a parent of now grown-up children. And I worked for 6 years for the Blair Labour government, which is where I first met Jim. And so I like to think I understand a little bit about the intersection between policy making and what happens on the ground, which I see all the time as governor, and also how the communication of those issues works in terms of public policy. That's with my media hat on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And for those of them who know me, I am Jim Knight, as it says at the bottom of my screen. I am a recovering politician, as suggested by my relationship with Fiona. Was many years ago now schools minister for 3 years, but then was given the golden parachute of a membership of the House of Lords, which is where I sit and do a bit of legislating, but most of my work remains around education in various forms. So I'd like to start really, I guess, with you, Deborah, Ben, and Eddie, to ask you what you think, what does it feel that school is for? Let's start with you, Deborah. There's such a big smile in response to that question.
I think, yeah, the school means different things to so many different people. And I think, yeah, there's been a tendency, or like there's a tradition for schools to mean getting young people grades, and schools can be very academic focused and very like grade focused and grade targeted. And I think, yeah, for a lot of young people, school doesn't mean that. And yeah, speaking from experience, I think school meant to me like building positive relationship with peers, being able to build relationships with, or like attachments with some teachers, and really finding like my identity and my sense of self. I think, yeah, in the traditional school system, it is often really hard for a young person to find their sense of self, but through the use of like external organizations, for example, FBB, when I was a young person, when I was a participant, I would never have been able to do public speaking, or I would never have been able to realize my assets or what I was really good at. And I think, yes, school sometimes is a hindrance for young people being able to find their passions and really being able to be asset-based. So I think, yeah, for school can mean so many different things for so many different people. But I think for a lot of young people, school means being able to build positive relationships, being able to find their passions and their sense of self. But I think for a lot of adults and a lot of people that have the power of making school what it is, believe that it should be very grade targeted and very like, yeah, basically based on grades and making sure, and attainment, sorry.
Cool, thank you. Ben.
I think school is supposed to be about fun and education, but I never really found it actually fun. Well, yeah. The only things I really ever liked about school was library and art.
Okay. And clearly you're having more fun at home.
Yep.
Just in respect of what Deborah said about how school for her, the important thing for her was about relationships and finding her own identity. I mean, obviously that's an ongoing project for all of us. And you're relatively young, but what do you, or indeed Caroline, how do you view that aspect when you're at home about the relationship forming part of school?
Well, it's okay. I don't have many friends at school. I only have one, and my little sister was death threatened by a bully just a year ago by this person named James. And well, I had one of my friends move off to Nova Scotia 2 years ago, so I only have one really close friend.
Okay, and you can of course see that close friend outside of school too, so that's fine.
Well, it's been
I only have the other friend I used to have that was really close. has now made friends with another person, and we don't see them anymore. But
Okay.
we have these really close friends called Morley and Lowen, and they're really kind. They're always really fun and excited, and we can drive and go and see them whenever we want.
So I think part of the difference with this year has been that, of course, we've shifted to homeschooling, but it's been homeschooling under COVID and lockdown.
Yeah.
So the thing about relationships is that it has been really challenging, and in fact, throughout, Ben has, is often expressed that he's missed his friends, and that's been a really strong ongoing theme throughout. But that's not a homeschooling thing; it's a COVID thing.
Of course.
And we definitely feel like we're long overdue being able to go and see other homeschooling families, because of course that wasn't catered for under the government rules and guidelines of schools going back necessarily. So yeah, we're struggling in that aspect, but sort of bursting to get back to it all. And Zoom does wonderful things, but it's not what 8-year-old play is about.
Yeah, no. And my 9-year-old stepdaughter, up until she was allowed to go back to school 2 weeks ago, was because essentially an only child, was really struggling with that lack of friendship and relationship and being able to have proper contact. So I think we all get that. Tia, welcome. I will bring you in just a second to introduce yourself, but I'll just let Eddie answer the question, and then you too can answer the question, and this gives you a bit of time to think about what you think school is for. Eddie.
Thanks. Yeah. So the purpose of school is a really interesting question, because I think it kind of, like what Ben said, school should be a place for learning, a place of fun, but it isn't. To lots of young people, it means something different. It means a place of stress. It means a place of standardized testing and that kind of thing. And I think school should be a place where you are built up, you are empowered and become a meaningful contributor to society. But a lot of people, it doesn't work like that, unfortunately. However, that said, it's also a great place for friendships and for learning how to interact with people, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. There's a voice that's not really my voice, but that's ringing in my head, that wants to respond to what you imply, that learning and fun go together. And there might be some people who would say, well, look, life isn't all fun, and one of the things you should learn in school is just hard work, and sometimes that isn't fun, and you just got to get on and do the learning. What would you say to that voice?
I'd say it's all a balance. I think that's a really good point. I think life is hard, and part of school is the point of school is to prepare you for that. So there needs to be challenges. School needs to challenge you, but it can also be fun in a meaningful way. Fun and kind of productivity don't have fun, and challenging, fun and stretching don't have to be direct opposites. It can all be a balance.
I agree with you. Tia, welcome. Do you want to just, first of all, quickly tell us very briefly about yourself, so we know where you're coming from, and then what your view is on what school is for? And we'll unmute you imminently. Roland is just working on that right now. There you go.
I don't think he is.
No, you're now unmuted. Hopefully we can hear you, but we can't. So there might be a problem with your mic. Should we? Why don't you have a go at sorting that out and just talk when you think it works, and we'll welcome that interruption. In the meantime, I will say to any of the others who haven't spoken, any reactions to those points from Eddie, Ben and Deborah about what school's for? Yeah, Ellie.
Thank you. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it, about how we identify as adults what school should be and what the children actually think school should be. I think the narrative around school being hard because life is hard is actually I'm going to offer some gentle challenge to that, because resilience isn't built by forcing it in and by putting children through adversity and hardship. Gentle challenge is what is important, but it's got to be delivered by attuned, reciprocal, caring, compassionate adults. And actually that lived experience builds human beings who are able to tolerate vulnerability in others, who are compassionate, who seek to help. And actually what we're seeing increasingly is when children have all different levels of vulnerability and capacity to cope with life. And many children come from different starting points. And what we're seeing is that increasing numbers from the middle ground, so we always were focused on those in deprivation and inequality and all sorts of difficult places. Those were always targeted and known as groups to struggle. But what we're seeing is a massive swell of middle ground children who are entering the education system and not thriving. In fact, they're finding it such an enormous challenge. And I think we need to be really alert to that and actually really sort of focus on why that is. And I've got lots of theories around that. I think we've got a lot of focus on secure attachments in early years and throughout pregnancy and infancy. And actually the school system is the opposite of building secure attachments, although there is a lot of great professionals who are trying their best to deliver that, but it's within a very rigid system, focused on, sanctions, punishments, zero tolerance, all sorts. So it's a real mix of narratives.
Thank you. And others should just pitch in if there's things that you want to say in response to that. I agree with all of that, Ellie, and I'm also interested, Eddie, you talked about empowerment, which, well, I'm interested in hearing more about what do you think a school system that wanted to empower young people, how might that be different to what it is now?
So I'm just going to clarify kind of what I remember that. I think empowering is about helping someone reach their full potential. It's about helping people develop skills like critical thinking, the ability to learn, but also helping them develop an understanding, an appreciation of kind of the world. And in what I do with human rights and stuff, it links to ideas of global citizenship and empowering students and young people to be able to create a better world for themselves in the future.
Yeah. Please, yeah.
Just to sort of address a couple of the points that you've been discussing, I think the aspect of school as challenge and needing to sort of push you that's been discussed, I think that's very valid and a very, it's easy to see that in the school system. But what I've learned from a year of homeschooling now is actually that what drives children, or at least my two, and I think a lot of humans, adults, all of us, is actually the intrinsic need to learn. And actually challenges will be taken on willingly if there's an end goal that individual has got some motivation to achieve. So with my two over the year, I've seen them go from coming out of the school system not wanting to read or write, talking about themselves as failures because handwriting's not good enough or spelling's not good enough, to writing chapter books and doing these amazing things and taking on calculations to work out recipes, which hasn't been pushed by me, but because there's that end goal, they've been willing to take on those challenges. And of course I'm there to support and provide resources and stuff like that. But that's sort of the flip side of it. Instead of pushing and saying you must sit down and do this, is actually the why becomes really, really important as a driver for learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Theo, are you back with us?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, great. Sorry
Fantastic.
About that.
So tell us a bit more about yourself and tell us your thoughts on what school's for and any response to what you've just been hearing.
My name's Theo and I'm part of the digital leader group here at school, and I have a huge passion for technology and believe that it can play a major role in learning, no matter whether it's through remote learning, hybrid learning, in the classroom, or even if you're doing or if you're no longer in the classroom. So
yeah, cool. And what school for?
I think it's mostly for building up skills, collaboration and communication, and all of these other key points and skills and techniques that you'd need either for later life or for day-to-day usage now and in the future. But I also think it's for specifically learning these skills, interaction with other people, and preparing you for later life.
And how do you think the school system is doing in delivering that?
I think right now it's doing fairly well, but I think there is with everything, there is definitely room for improvement. For example, during the lockdown period, schools were using technology more, but I definitely think that I'm sort of afraid that some schools will be just going back to old methods of teaching. I think getting rid of everything that's happened in lockdown. Obviously, there's some things that we'll want to get rid of, but there are some vital tools. For example, sharing resources on Google Classroom or a similar platform has helped students quite a lot.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Let me move the debate on, unless, I mean, Fiona, you haven't come in. I mean, Tom and Joe, I've sort of taken your health warning that you're not really going to want to say anything unless provoked. So yeah, please do come in, the two of you, if there's something you do want to say. But Fiona, I'm going to provoke you to just reflect on what you've heard.
Well, I think at the beginning, I think it was Roland said, let's hope we hear something we haven't heard before. And I think one of the problems with the education debate is we have actually heard a lot of these things before. And in the past year in particular, we've heard a lot about the inequalities that exist, you know, the differences between the pupils who are more marginalised and those that aren't. But the problem is there's no political action or drive to do anything about it. And when you said, Jim, there was a voice in your ear, I actually wondered if it was Nick Gibbs' voice, because that, you know, your successor as schools minister, because that thing about drill and drone, you know, no excuses, let's, you know, I think he said that, you know, social and emotional education was a peripheral and had to be driven out of the school system. You know, that we've been moving in the opposite direction, and what we really need is a more enlightened approach to policy making that's listening to the arguments that I've certainly heard and we're hearing today about how the system could be different. And one of the things that seems blindingly obvious to me is that you've got to measure success by more than just exams, because if you started measuring things beyond simply exams, schools would be incentivized to behave in a very different way and start offering some of the things that parents and young people around this discussion have been talking about. And personally, my preference would be to do something about GCSEs and move to some sort of final qualification at 18, which would then open up the whole of secondary education, certainly, to a more broader experience for young people where, I mean, it's not only exams, the exams have been narrowed down to such a small suite of subjects now that, you know, we know that creativity and you know, PE and all these other things are just being driven out. And that's absolutely tragic, because if you want to enjoy school, you've got to do things that people actually enjoy doing, not just things that they don't enjoy doing. So those would be my initial thoughts about the discussion.
Yeah, and I agree. And yeah, I could confess that there's a sort of inner Nick Gibb that nags away at me and that I have to sort of suppress and just put down. But I won't explore that too deeply. It's too scary. Fiona, you wanted to say something else? Did I see a finger?
I think that's Kate.
Okay. Kate, you've moved on my screen. That's very confusing. You're now where Ellie was.
Well, if I could come in for a minute, because Fiona, I completely agree. I've been a teacher for 19 years and, you know, I'm an educator, but it's about a community. So the school that I've been at for 15 years is just amazing, because it's not just about our children, it's bringing everybody in the community. We've got like a dance centre on site. So at the moment, Teo and some of the other students are going to be planning and preparing some internet sessions for the internet elders, for example. So when we can welcome people back in again, and just have that cross-transference of skills. Actually, it's not just about, like, I teach geography. It's not just about me getting, you know, like the flooding that's happening at the moment in Australia kind of in their heads. It's about opening up to, like, you know, they're lifelong learners and they're going to know where to go for information. So another big part of it is the extracurricular element. I've been so lucky here to take field trips, you know, locally and in the UK and to places like China and New York. And when I bump into ex-students and ex-parents in the community, That's the thing that they still remember. They still remember that sense of awe and wonder about the world, and those team working skills I think that Teo mentioned. Actually, it's about the employability and getting them to be good communicators as well as effective listeners. So yeah, Fiona, I absolutely wholeheartedly agree.
And Tom, I'll bring you in, but Kate, as a school leader, do you do all of that stuff that you've just talked passionately about, despite the system or thanks to the system?
Right, this is the view of me myself, so I'm going to speak my own personal view, not the view of my school. I think to some degree more recently it's a little bit despite the system, but we've done it here anyway. So my school is fantastic. I've been here for 15 years because of the leadership and the young people and the parents in the community. We've kind of got our systems and procedures and everything in place, and it's about shaping the whole kind of child. So our belief system is there, but sometimes I must admit, when I was first looking at swapping exam boards in 2017 and moving over to the new system, I did become a little bit disheartened because, the amount, quantity and everything had gone up, but not necessarily those same conversations around metacognition and self-regulation, all the things that were going out there with all my friends on Twitter and all my little geeky kind of teacher chats, that seemed to be missing. It seemed to be about kind of like knowing a number of things. So maybe 10% now it's despite the system.
Okay, well, you've still got a certain amount of freedom to do it if you want to.
Yeah, definitely.
Tom, and then I'll come to Caroline, and then I do want to move the conversation on slightly.
Yeah, I just wanted to build off the back of what Kate said. Sounds like running a really excellent school, sort of despite the system, if you like. However, I guess the reality is for a number of the young people we work with, and I'm going to sound a bit like the Grinch here because there's been lots of nice thinking about education over the last 10 minutes, but the reality is it's those grade 4s matter at the moment in the current system we live in. For them to go on to the colleges they want to, universities, get the life opportunities, those grade 4s are still, unfortunately, such a life predictor. And actually, I think what me and Deborah were speaking about before this is that despite this, schools are still taking quite an archaic approach, I think. An approach that is all about, I guess, fill up the vessel with information, as opposed to looking at, well, what conditions are needed in order to have excellent learners and drive attainment. And I still think that all the things we talked about can really work within this system. What drives young people feeling safe in school, that sense of belonging and support, is all based around relationships. And I still think that you can have amazing relational schools that really drive attainment, and in fact I think it is that relational approach that does drive attainment, and I think often that is lost. It's sort of seen it as an either or dichotomy, as opposed to them both going hand in hand.
Yeah,
also just
thank you.
Could I just add something very quickly?
You can. Yeah, sorry.
So I think that it's definitely focused on numbers and analytics more. So for example, the exam grades or predicted grades or marks in a test. And there's no way to measure your team building skills, your communication, or all of these other techniques or skills or whatever you need to use later on. So, and that's quite hard to judge. So it's quite a hard thing to comprehend.
You're taking me to where I want the conversation to go, but I promised Caroline that you could come into.
Okay, thanks. I'll sort of briefly try and summarize what I've been thinking about all of these brilliant points. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm an academic and sort of got through and did my PhD and then was supervising students. And it became sort of through that process really clear to me that actually the students that are coming into universities and wanting to do postgraduate degrees don't necessarily have the skills that are needed to do those things anymore. And that was quite shocking to me, that actually these grade A students were coming and then being completely lost when they were told to go and do this by yourself, go and research, go and find this out, because they've been spoon-fed. I mean, we hear this a lot in these kinds of discussions, and it's all about, as has already been said, filling this empty vessel full of knowledge, which knowledge changes, but actually the ability to find knowledge doesn't necessarily change. Maybe the way we do it does, but actually you can just continually build on that. So what's been really interesting for this year, and in fact Ben said it this morning, that what's different between going to school is that at school you have to write about things you haven't done, is how Ben phrased it, whereas at home you actually get to do those things. And
Yeah.
I think that that's such a key point. And Kate mentioned this earlier with field trips. I think for most people who've been through the British education system, actually it's the field trips that stick in our minds, and those skills that we learned and those connections during those field trips. And what's brilliant about homeschooling is that basically you're always on a field trip, and it makes such a big difference, I think. And I wonder how the difference is going to be at the output, sort of going into university versus ticking the boxes and getting A stars for knowing stuff.
Yeah, I can't look at a meandering river without remembering floating oranges down one with Mr. Dixon. Let me then move to assessment, and tests, which in a way is, we've already heard in the discussion, feels a bit like it's the tail that wags the dog of the system. And Fiona's suggested, and I personally agree, that maybe it's time to call quits on GCSEs at 16. What's your views? Ben, what do you think about testing in schools? Do you think, when you've been in school, was there the right amount of testing? Yeah, there's always going to be some testing in schools just to see how well you're doing. Do you think it was too much? Did you find it stressful? What was your view of it all?
I found it in year 2 rather easy, but I knew they would just get a lot harder and harder as the school everybody in the school would be thinking you might have been doing like lots and lots of research at home when you might have just forgotten what you needed to research, and then you would have gotten into lots of trouble.
Was there any aspect of being tested that you enjoyed?
I did enjoy the tests. The teacher used to always just carry on talking about the test, but by the time the teacher had actually finished talking about the test, I'd finished my test.
Okay.
And I'd usually got all stars.
Excellent. Well, getting lots of stars is lots of fun. Deborah, what's your view on the amount of testing in schools?
I think, I agree with what everyone said previously, that testing isn't the way of like measuring young people's attainment. I think testing is one of the, like, a root of all evil. I think like it builds so much stress and anxiety in our young people, and it really does harm their mental health and their ability to actually access learning. I think, like, we've all learned from this year and this current climate that, like, we've all reflected on how learning can be very accessible to some young people. And I think testing is a real example of that. And I think, testing can bring a lot of anxiety for our young people in the prep of the exams and also after. I remember sitting my GCSEs and like that month after sitting them and then waiting for your results is absolutely traumatic, like, because you just don't know. And I think there's so much pressure, like Ben was talking about, of like really trying to do well, when there's so much pressures of how that is a stepping stone to the rest of your life. And I think something that we do need to focus on is like, just the mental health maybe of our young people, and how testing can be quite a traumatic experience. And I think after bringing testing back in after such a crisis that we've all endeavored this year would be absolutely horrible, because I think young people, everyone's talking about learning loss, and I think there is a pressure from teachers being like, we need to spoon feed them, we need to get that attainment, we need to get those level 4s. And I think that will be very detrimental for our young people. And I think rather we should, instead of testing for the rest of the year, like maybe just support our young people in rebuilding their mental health and making them feel a real sense of purpose and self-worth. I think for me, that's the most important thing. And I think testing can be quite detrimental when young people are thinking about their purpose and their next steps.
I'm not going to challenge you on that last part, but I'll just, it is my role in this session to ask the Nick Gibb question. So the challenge to the first part of what you said would be, yeah, but come on, we don't want people driving cars without being tested that they're good enough drivers to be able to and safe enough to do that. We don't want people operating on us if we don't know that they are competent surgeons. There's always going to be a role for testing. At what point, what's the right amount, and at what point do you start testing people and putting them through that stress of doing the test and waiting for the marks?
I think, there is, don't get me wrong, there is a space and an element of young people needing to be tested. But like Caroline said, like, she has met students that haven't been competent in what they have been tested for and been able to get to. For example, they have just been spoon-fed. And is testing really a test of young people's knowledge, or is it a test of how much knowledge young people have been able to keep in their brain and memorize just before they sit their exam? And I think that's where we've got to find the middle ground and actually realize what we are testing, and whether we are just testing the young people that are able to spoon feed all this knowledge, manage to memorize it just before they go into exam and write everything that they can remember, or are we actually testing young people's skills and ability and longevity of knowing how to utilize those skills in the long run? And I don't think our current testing system allows that longevity and actually helps our young people build up their skills.
And there's lots of different ways of testing people. And I guess, Eddie, I'm coming to you imminently. And you'll be taken off mute by Roland while we're waiting, which is now happening. So what I was going to say, Deborah, was I guess there's all sorts of different ways of testing people. And football is an interesting example where in the end you're tested by performance. You do lots of preparation, you do lots of training, but it's only in the match setting that you're properly tested. And that's a really good test, and people can see and appraise how well you performed within that team setting. Eddie, you described the decision and your place in the decision not to have written exams this summer as interesting. What did you mean by that?
That's a good point. I personally, when last September, I couldn't imagine how my GCSEs were going to go ahead. So I assumed the government would cancel them fairly soon. I was right, they were cancelled, but irritatingly, they were cancelled at the very last minute possible, just before the lockdown, which I personally don't think was very fair to students, but the government did their best. I think it's actually going to be a better system. The way that we're doing it at our school is we're kind of having these ongoing tests, and they're going to use what they can, classwork, homework, things we've written, things we've calculated, as a evidence folder, and then we're just going to have some in-class tests. And I like that. I think that would be a great system, because that allows you to take stuff from the good days. One of the big problems with GCSEs, in my opinion, is that one day, that 2 days, that week decides everything for your GCSEs. And I mean, you can resit them, but it's not the same. If you have things going on at home, if you're really ill, there's just no, I don't think it's fair to concentrate everything into that one moment, that one test. It puts so much stress and pressure on people. And I don't think it's very helpful. I think it's outdated. I also think that we shouldn't kind of be bombarded with facts, and we should be maybe tested on skills like critical thinking and problem solving. That would be so much more useful in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree. Tio, what's your view on the amount of testing and whether we're getting it right, and whether actually we need GCSEs at 16? But aren't they just another obstacle before you go on to do post-16 learning that we don't necessarily need?
I definitely do agree with what Deborah and Eddie have said so far. There should be tests over a longer period of time, because then you can actually build up what a proper idea of what people know or what they don't know, if you want to do tests that way. But then also, as you mentioned earlier, tests would need to be there in order to decide, okay, if you're having an operation, this person has passed this test. But I think the current testing method of just trying to retain as much information as you can over this short period of time, for starters, will you be able to retain that information in the future? But then also this retaining of information, it may not apply to certain work environments, because sometimes practical work is the only way in order for you to learn something, or in order for you to actually be able to be good at something, or to get good at something. It's like a hobby, for example. If you just sit there just trying to learn information, or you're just going on a course and you're learning information, you need to then implement it, do some practical work alongside it for you to actually, in order to get the results you require. So I think over a longer period of time, and having tests that would be more adaptable to work environments would be a lot more helpful.
Deborah, and then Caroline.
Yeah, just to also add, like, on your point of what we can do to maybe help or go alongside testing, or even replace testing, is maybe focusing on like young people's well-being and their SEL competencies and how successful they are in using those. For example, self-management, self-regulation, and self-awareness, which are actually skills that young people will take and be able to take in their futures and use a bit more practically. And I also think, yeah, there's like an element of testing at not being very trauma informed, and I think there's an element of, just because it's so memory focused and it not being very trauma informed, there's like a real divide between which young people will be able to excel in the testing environment and which young people won't be able to. And I think, yeah, as a society, we really need to make sure that our school environments and our testing systems are very trauma informed. And I think, yeah, there's an element of, I think we've noticed it coming back from COVID, that a lot of our young, or a lot of the young people that I work with have been mentioning that they don't feel passionate about anything anymore, or they don't believe that they're good at anything anymore. And there's a real lack of like confidence and self-belief in what they're actually good at. And I think that is going to be so detrimental if testing is brought back in like straight away or in the next couple of years, because yeah, young people don't believe that they are good at any subjects anymore. And I think a lot of what our teachers and people in schools need to do is, yeah, really encourage our young people and really give them that constant self-affirmations and make them and positive regard. And I think really like embed that they are good. And I think there's an element of like really focusing on our young people's assets. And I think that's something we do at FBB, where we focus on young people's assets. We take them out of the schooling environment. And yeah, like we were talking about field trips, for example, young people that are passionate about public speaking, we allow them to do their project or their final product as like a TED talk, for example, and they can wow the room. And I think it's stuff like that where we just have to be a lot more asset based, and we should replace testing with figuring out how our young people are and focusing on well-being and SEL competencies. I think that's what could replace testing.
Thank you. Very well put. Caroline.
Completely agree with all of that, Deborah. That was really eloquently put. And I think what I would just like to add to that briefly is to say that this example of a surgeon needing to have gone through a certain amount of education to be tested on their skills, I think absolutely, but let's not put that in our mind and put that onto children, because actually a doctor has chosen to take that path, and it's very specific skill set that of course we need to ensure they have before they can go on to practice. When we're talking about kids from 5 and 6 year olds up to sort of 18 and leaving school, actually, as you've been saying, Deborah and Eddie, that this constant testing is a huge source of stress and anxiety. And what I've seen with my two is going from school where we're having to learn spellings, a certain amount of spellings every week, we have to get those spellings right, to on the day being like, oh, I totally forgot how to spell Wednesday, when I know that they can spell it. And actually, I know that because in their day-to-day writing and use of all these different things and Googling stuff, they have to get the spelling right, otherwise they don't get what they need. And it's sort of zooming out and being like, well, what's the important thing here?
Yeah.
And why are we testing it? And on that same line, if we are so determined to keep testing, then we need to broaden what we're testing and not just say it has to be science, English and maths. Actually, we need to test everything, because kids have amazing interests and skills in all these wonderful things, which are going to be so important for as we continue into the 21st century and face all the challenges that are rapidly coming our way. Actually, does it matter if we can multiply certain numbers? Well, we can use a calculator for that in the real world. What we need to be able to do is problem solve. So let's test that.
Yeah, and Ellie, I'll come to you. Last week I did a vodcast with Made by Dyslexia, Kate Griggs's organisation, and she makes the point very well that for many dyslexics, our form of assessment and memory recall on little desks in large sports halls doesn't work very well. And yet most dyslexics are really strong at those things, that the problem solving and some of the things that are competencies that employers say that they need, and we're just not testing those things. Ellie.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the focus on testing is all about business for exam boards, actually, and we need to be really brave about acknowledging that, and the disparity between algorithms and whatever postcode you live in or what the previous cohort did. That's what it's all about. If we are never mind GCSEs, I'm really concerned about SATs in primary school. Children, very young children, are absolutely wired to understand whether or not they're accepted and safe, because that's just how we thrive in the world. Am I safe? Am I accepted? Am I doing okay here? Is the pack going to chuck me out overnight to be fed by wolves or not? Fed on by the wolves. And so, very young children from a very young age are aware of where they aren't accepted and how they are failing. And that is a massive problem, and we really need to be brave about that. Also, in terms of the subjectivity of testing, let's talk about that, because, in maths there is a right or wrong, but in English, is there a right or wrong? If you've got a young child exploring their creative writing skills, what's right? Do they really need to spot a fronted adverbial in a paragraph? No, I'm an English graduate. I didn't know what a fronted adverbial was. And also just, so shame of failure, I think, is massively wired in from a very long age. Exam results are also metrics for social mobility. And if that's the only way that we're tracking social mobility is on exam results, we're doing something wrong. Happiness. So if we're talking about what we're testing, we do not prioritise happiness and well-being, and we need to. Because Professor Richard Layard, I've shared it in the chat, he directly correlated happiness and well-being is not linked to how well you did at school. It's actually linked, so success in adulthood is directly linked to how happy you were at school. And how are we defining success? Because for me, success is about, do I have key skills to have difficult conversations calmly? Am I alert to those who are vulnerable in my community, and how can I help? Do I know how to connect to a wide variety of people? So-and-so next to me is brilliant at strategic thinking, but so-and-so, this other person is great at branding and identity. There's a whole range. And then there's the plumber down the road, and we are all diverse individuals. And what's happening is we are trying to funnel children, into a very low formula and then we're trying to measure them against that. And that, for me, is creating a massive mental health crisis in our children and young people, and they are falling out of education in massive numbers, and the blame is being placed back on the family as being poor parents or not engaged enough, or it's a mess, frankly.
Thank you. Fiona, a quick one, and then I want from each of you just a final thought, and particularly, if possible, a quick win of what we could do to change our school system to make it better. That would be nice and easy for us to just do. Fiona.
Okay, well, I'm going to give you both in one answer, as it were, because first I've got to speak to Jim's inner Nick Gibb, because I became a parent and a governor at a time when there were no league tables, there were no tests, There was no Ofsted, and there were a lot of absolutely terrible schools. And the kids who got most let down by those schools were from the poorest backgrounds. I know that. I went through that. My children were in a school like that. So I think we've got to be very careful that we don't drift too far off to something that's really wishy-washy, because you've got to allow some sort of standardized testing and external testing to give schools validation that they're doing something well. That is important, otherwise you will have failure, and I can tell you the children who will suffer from that. I think the trouble is that exams have become everything, and as I said at the start, you could have other things that also count towards a final qualification. And for what everybody's saying, it seems blindingly obvious to me that two of the things that could change. One is that young people's voices need to be heard much more clearly in external assessment. I mean, what is wrong with having, what young people feel part of that process? Their views should be heard, because you'd find out pretty quickly if schools were putting them under enormous pressure and making them unhappy. They don't really count for anything at the moment, young people's voices. And the second thing is that I think Ofsted should have to prioritise inclusion in order to get an outstanding grade, because it is far too easy for schools to go after the exams at the expense of young people, and they can get away with it because it's a competitive environment. If to get outstanding, you had to be an inclusive school, and you had to account for why young people were leaving in the large numbers that in some communities they are, for various different reasons, schools would re-incentivize themselves and start to work to keep those young people in. And that would involve giving them the pathways and giving them the opportunities that would make them happier and keep them in school. So I've never understood why inclusion isn't more highly prioritized in the external accountability framework.
Thank you. Right, I'm now going to go around the squares. So Roland, if you can make sure that everyone's unmuted, including Tom and Joe, because I'm going to ask you for your quick win or comment. Kate, start with you.
I want to pick up Fiona's point, empower your young people. We call it focus groups here, and we have student leaders in all sorts of areas. So Tio is one of our digital leaders, but we have groups for community, charity, e-safety, diversity, and it's where you actually give our students a voice, the things that they think are important, then feed into our school policy. So SLT here, they bring about change about the school. So it's got to be a two-way street. It can't just come down from the top. Let's actually empower our young people to have a say in how our school runs, how their education, the formal and the informal parts run.
Thank you. Deborah?
I think external organizations like FBB in schools would be amazing. But on a serious note, I think adequate mental health support for our young people, especially coming back and returning from COVID. And yeah, also a bit more effort on helping young people build positive relationships amongst peers and also teachers.
Thank you. Eddie?
So this has been the most amazing discussion. It's been incredible. Two very quick points. There's a quote by Nelson Mandela, which is, "Education is the most powerful weapon to change the world." I think it's really true here. Education can help us create a generation of change makers to create a better world. We need to be we need to have the best education possible for our young people. And my second point is, I think if the government were to commission a review into education, listening to young people, I think that would be a really important first step that we could take.
Thank you. Brilliant. Tom?
Yeah, I'm going to steal one of Deborah's ideas for this, I think. I think sort of piggybacking off what Fiona said as well around the role of Ofsted, I think that, there's a lot of focus on SEN and pupil premium and how we cater to those groups, but I still think that schools can take a more trauma-informed approach, and that this should be something that Ofsted looks for. Is a school trauma-informed? Are they catering to those young people who have experienced trauma? Which is far more than we expect, as we found out through our work. So yeah, that would be my quick.
Cool. Thank you, Joe.
Just to sort of piggyback on the back of what Tom just said. I think maybe something really simple which could make a big difference is getting league tables and schools to report on student satisfaction, well-being, things that are beyond sort of tests. I think league tables show you how well a school did, but does it show you sort of how happy a young person was leaving at 16, and that can make a huge difference.
Thank you, Ben.
I think that children at school should be allowed to have like an hour where they can go outside and like there used to be a thing at my old school called Muddy Day, where we'd all bring our own muddy clothes and we'd go down to this part where there was like a bog and a bridge and a stream, and we'd all play. And I remember we used to build dams with my friends, then knock them down and watch a giant wave go down the stream. And sometimes we'd throw mud balls at each other and get into loads of trouble.
They're more muddy.
Great. And Caroline?
So taking up Kate's theme really and Deborah's of empowerment, empowering kids, and really rolling that into some more project-based learning. I've just seen such a stark contrast in my kids and how much they've learned since they've been home from school. It's just been kind of shocking in a way. And what's been really interesting is that while they were at school, I was fairly engaged, Mum, and I was a governor for a while, trying to sort of link different child's interests to a theme, and watching now the kids are home, we might be all interested in one topic, but actually Ben will take the idea in one direction and do something quite sort of engineering construction based, whereas my daughter will go down a really creative route. So for example, we've watched Hamilton recently and Ben's super interested in the history of it, whereas my daughter's totally taken by the songs and the dance. And I just think actually they've had the freedom to explore.
Interested in the history.
Oh, he's not interested in the history apparently.
I've gotten so annoyed by Sophia just playing Hamilton and just talking about it and just dancing to it all the time. This has
So
happened
Sophia's more interested than Ben.
This has happened about 5 times and it's just gets so much on my nerves.
Okay, a point well made. Thank you. Well, I'm fast out of time. In fact, I'm 2 minutes over. So, Ellie.
Yeah, I would like to see less diminishing and shaming around prioritising happiness and well-being. If you place prioritising happiness and well-being at the centre of everything you do, you're more likely to have a resilient and successful population. So that would be my first one, and less. Just flipping the narrative that zero tolerance and shame doesn't build good results, and actually that again being zero tolerance towards your teaching profession doesn't help either. So less of a poo-poo to what's known as soft skills and a priority of happiness, well-being, trauma-informed. All of that's the root of everything, because then you're unlocking frontal learning, cognitive learning, and you're actually more likely to retain what you're learning as well.
Great. Last word to you, Tia.
Well, I definitely believe that lifelong leaders are lifelong learners, and having exams over a period of time to build up a better idea of what knowledge people are retaining, or their ability to tackle challenges or practical work and all of these other things, rather than just focusing purely on statistics and what people can retain and what knowledge they actually have at that point, in be it one day or those couple of days over those exams. So I think that is an important thing to consider, but also the enthusiasm students have, because that is important, because otherwise, with a lack of enthusiasm, you won't want to learn, you won't want to do this, that's the other, you won't want to retain the knowledge, you won't be able to do all of these things which you would need for later life.
Thank you. Well, thank you to everybody. It's been a great discussion, as lots of people have said in the chat, and thanks everyone for all their contributions to the chat, which is also full of richness and joy. It's been a great session. I'm hugely grateful. For those who are impatient for action and who are interested in empowerment, I would just inspire you by saying that I recently spoke to the former education minister in Italy, who less than 2 years ago implemented an hour a week in the timetable for sustainable citizenship lessons, so that everybody in Italy now, at whatever age at school, has to not only learn about climate change, but has to learn about what they're going to do about it for a whole hour a week, which I kind of love as a thing that we might want to do here one day. thank you all. We've got another session coming up in about a month's time. Over to you, Roland.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks to everybody who came along. This was absolutely brilliant discussion, and I really appreciate you've all taken time out of your mornings to and contribute to it. I don't want to ramble, so because we're 5 minutes over, so you've all got other stuff that I'm sure you need to be getting on with. So I just want to say thank you to you, thank you to Jim, thank you to the audience for coming along, and I've been posting links in the chat as well. So if people are interested, they can either visit our website to hear about the next event or more. So thank you to all, and I'm going to close the room now, and hope you all have a great day.
See you all. Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.